Adam, alcoholic.
Hi,
Ralph.
Adam.
Alcoholic.
Hi, Ralph.
Hi.
Should we just do a quick summary, Ralph, of where we are? Welcome to anybody that's new. If you're just joining us, we are at the beginning of We Agnostics on page 44. When you hear chapter 5, as we just read it, it talks about the chapter of the agnostic, the description of the alcoholic, and our personal adventures before and after, make clear these three pertinent ideas. Up to now has been the description of the alcoholic. I want to just recap more about alcoholism. There's questions all the way through the book. Two of the ways that I was taken through the big book was prayers, promises, warnings, and directions with 4 highlighters. And there's a lot of warnings in the first 2 pages of We Agnostics, but also to turn the statements in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous into questions and direct those at a person that I'm working with. So the big book in and of itself becomes the working guide to work with a newcomer. It's almost like this interface where I can ask these questions. So I'm just going to briefly, Ralph, if I can take the liberty of just catch everybody up to where we are now. Okay. So that third chapter is mostly about the mental obsession. And these are the questions. I'm going to go through them really quickly. These would be the questions I would ask a newcomer when I'm taking them through the book. Questions like, have I been unwilling to admit I'm a real alcoholic? Am I and do I see that I'm bodily and mentally different from my fellows? Has my drinking career been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove that I can control my drinking? Have I learned to fully concede to my inner myself that I'm an alcoholic? The word concede means to surrender with a fight. I might look at how he defended his right to prove that he wasn't an alcoholic. Continuing, have I lost the ability to control my drinking? I would ask him that question. Does he believe that he will ever regain that control? Has he seen at times that he thought he was regaining control? Am I convinced that I'm in the grip of a progressive illness? These are all black and white questions. I mean, once a newcomer goes through and acknowledges these, he's going to start to see, like Bill Wilson found, that he was in a corner, that he couldn't live with it. And we're going to start to see the ways that I can't live without it as we go along. Does there appear to be any kind of treatment that will make me like other people? Right? In some instances, there was brief recovery. Have I seen that? Do I believe there's any such thing as making a normal drinker out of someone like me? Did I pursue that delusion, again, or illusion, to the gates of insanity and death? I go through all of these. Do I believe after a long period of sobriety that it would qualify me to drink as other men do? Those 3 people in More About Alcoholism, the businessman who stops at 35 years old, falls into that delusion. And then you'll see Jim's story and Fred's story. If you're new, go through those stories and take the story and look at the symptoms. Did I drink like Jim? Did I think like Jim? Did I feel like Jim? Did I drink like Fred? Did I think like Fred? Was I as hopeless as Fred? All of them have this delusion that somehow through self-knowledge and without enlarging and perfecting their spiritual life that they can overcome alcoholism. All of them concede at some point to the fact that in and of themselves, with self-will alone, they cannot do this. Could I leave liquor alone for a year? And continuing, was I confused by my utter inability to leave alcohol alone, no matter how great the wish, right? And then it talks about Jim's story. Do I believe that if I fail to enlarge and my spiritual life, I'll drink again? And if you're new, what does that mean? Because Bill said it in his story, to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life. And just these final few questions. Have I suffered from the distorted ability to think straight about drinking? In other words, I never took my first drink drunk. With a sound mind, if I've got any considerable period of sobriety, I am still going to somehow tell myself that lie and step around the room and believe it. That's what it means to be powerless, that I have a mind that's going to continue to take me back to drinking. And if to drink is to die, like it is for me, this is a death sentence when you're working with a new person. If they do not find a spiritual solution to this problem, they are faced with a very, very serious thing. And I talk to people all the time. When somebody's really beaten by this, it's very easy to work with them. And when they're not, there's nothing we can say that's right, because they will defend their right to drink. Continuing down the last couple of pages here. Just being sober never kept me sober. On my own power, though I raise a fight, would it one way give to some trivial reason for me to have a drink again? There's another question. Do I believe my problem is a hopeless condition without Alcoholics Anonymous? And then these final questions. It says here, has this process snuffed out the flicker or conviction that I can do the job myself? Right? Do I believe that any human power can provide such a defense? These are the last final questions that go into this thing. So there we are. That's where we are up to this point now. That understanding, again, that even the consequences are insufficient to keep me sober. It's really a daunting place to be if you're new, working with a new person. That powerlessness doesn't mean I can't drink again. It means that I will drink again. Again, that I have no effective mental defense against the first drink. And now coming into We Agnostics, we're going to be faced with a couple of choices. They're going to be black and white choices. And Ralph's going to talk a little about that.
Ralph, Alcoholic, Chapter 4, We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, we hoped you'll learn something of alcoholism. We hope we have made it clear the distinction between alcoholic and non-alcoholic. If is a condition, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit drinking entirely, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience to conquer. That's all highlighted. If is a condition, only is circled, which meaning that's the only option we have for alcoholics like us. And what they're talking about in the preceding chapters is what Adam covered masterfully. Have I learned, about the craving? Have I identified that I have this, that I suffer from this mental obsession? Do I know the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic, a problem drinker, a hard drinker, and the real alcoholic? Am I the real alcoholic? These are all the questions and considerations. And here's the key word in here, because he uses a word probably, an alcoholic, and that's a drunk trap. We call it drunk trap, because in other times he uses every alcoholic. But this word here, because he didn't want to tell that you are an alcoholic, but he says you're probably an alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit drinking entirely, in other words, you could quit, but you can't stay quit, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, that's because of the craving. Once the craving kicks in, you're probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. In other words, do the steps or die. Or do you have some other type of way to stop? And up until this point, if I've done my job good as a sponsor working with a new guy, I let him see, hopefully he sees the hopelessness and futility of continuing to drink and get beat up by alcohol. Because it's kind of funny, what brings us here is what keeps us here. If that be the case, it says only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such experience seems impossible. And that's a question mark. Does this seem impossible to you? Do you think that, a spiritual experience is possible to you at this point? Because for me, I know I came in here as a Catholic, and I know looking back on my life, when I was 13, I kind of moved away from the church when my parents stopped making me go to church. That, and I heard several speakers were coming in that saying that it was a separation from God and a separation from man. And I identified when they said that, because I didn't feel that God was in my life. I had gone to church every Sunday. Now, that wasn't what the Catholic Church was saying, but that's what I was hearing. And I also heard him say is a separation from man. I felt I was separated from my friends. So I felt discontent, like a soul sickness upon me. So, but to continue as he means is disaster. That's a question and consideration, John. Do you think you could go on keep going and drinking and trying to control and drinking and enjoy your drinking, especially if it's alcoholic of the hopeless variety? Are you an alcoholic of the hopeless variety? Do you know what that means? And here's the question, the consideration. To be doomed to alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. They're only hard for alcoholics. If you have diabetes or cancer, you're not going to, it's an easy decision to make. You're going to take the treatment. And here in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have that treatment. And if you've been sober for a while, it says to be doomed in alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis. You could substitute those words and to be doomed in alcohol, to be doomed in a life run on self-will, all right, or to live on a spiritual basis. Because lots of times you see people in recovery at many years and they're miserable because they're running life on self-will. Adam?
Yeah, there's actually 4 warnings on this page. There's 4 really, really strong warnings. But it's very interesting because as a step guide working with somebody, those questions, like, it becomes really clear. If you really want to, you can't quit entirely. I mean, Wilson has gone to great lengths to ask those questions all the way through this chapter, right? And the second piece, you have little control over the amount you take, the phenomenon of craving. I mean, if a person has been thorough going through the preceding 2 chapters or 3 chapters, including the doctor's opinion, it's clear as a bell. Otherwise, they're going to be at this place and they're going to be confused. So that first warning, if that be the case, right? It says, you may be suffering from an illness and only your spiritual experience will conquer. That's the first warning. The second warning at the bottom of the next paragraph, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, these are not easy alternatives. It's because I'm defending my right to play God or defending my right to drink. I haven't conceded to myself. And that's what's so hard about working with people that haven't hit, like the 12 and 12 says, a bottom. Who cares to admit complete defeat? If they're in a hot tub with a supermodel, a fifth of whiskey and an 8-ball, and their dad sends them to rehab, we don't expect them to be happy. And then they show up at my home group, and it's like, why? If step 1 is a hard sell, you don't think this is going to be a hard sell? If you have to do a hard sell on step 1 to a new guy, it's going to be, it's like pushing a rope in sales. You can't do it. But from my experience with a lot of us, when somebody's really beaten by alcohol or beaten by, even with process addiction, by a life run on self-will, this becomes a pretty easy sell, the first and second half of step 1. But the second this part right here, this we agnostics, this is where it gets tricky. And I just, this is a very difficult chapter. Some people love it. We'll see as we go along. Ralph, do you want to continue? I can continue reading.
Go ahead, read.
But it isn't so difficult. It says half of our original fellowship were exactly that type, right? At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics, right? Defending our right to drink, trying to prove ourselves an exception to the rule, right? Therefore, non-alcoholic. But after a while, we had to face the fact we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Third warning. This is the third warning here, okay? Perhaps it's going to be that way with you, but cheer up, again, like it says. And he says it again, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics, okay? Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. In other words, don't stop here. The suggestion with the second step, the suggestion with this is just being open-minded to spiritual principles. Again, I will challenge a new person based on mathematics and based on the immutable laws of physics like inertia, velocity, centrifugal force, gravity. The question here is, we can see all of these laws in the natural world, in the sciences. Why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? And based on that idea, can they just be open-minded? So some of the concepts that are going to follow. It says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy or life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, then that might even be trying to live by the 10 Commandments or some other code of morals, right? Many of us would have recovered long ago. You see the priest, the rabbi, and the atheist all sitting in rehab. You know what I mean? And you can see that a code of morals obviously wasn't enough for them. But we found such codes or philosophies did not save us. Did I find that was not enough? Okay, no matter how much I tried, we could not wish to be moral, okay, which is conduct. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, the will, right? But the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were insufficient. Do I see that in and of myself, with everything that I've tried, I could not overcome alcoholism on my own? On my self-will. Again, it's another way for a newcomer to see defeat. He can see it in his inability to control and enjoy his drinking. He can see it in his inability to stop. He can start to see that he can't stay stopped on his own. Now the question is, can I derive and manage my life without some kind of spiritual guidance in and of myself, even without alcohol? Do I see that I'm starting to spiritually deconstruct without some kind of spiritual principles? Ralph?
Yeah, a couple things. It says, but we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us. That's a consideration. When dealing with somebody, it's an old idea that we had for a living, a game plan for a living. But a funny story, I was away at band camp, aka prison, with this guy. His name was Rev. And Rev held Bible studies in there, and he helped a lot of people come closer to their higher power, to Jesus. But and he didn't want to know nothing about treatment, know nothing about AA, nothing about this. I found God this time. I found God this time. Then that one bit I was doing, he was saved. He was saving people. He was doing all kinds of stuff, and he would come back again and again and again. So it's not that we're talking about religion, specific religion. We're just talking about developing a personal relationship with the power. We hope you've learned up until this point, when dealing with somebody, that the problem is lack of power. The solution is finding the power, and the program of action is taking a series of steps to have you have an intimate relationship with that power that we call God, higher power, whatever you want to do. But it's funny because when I read that, I immediately thought of Rev. And our human resources as marshaled by the will, that's a consideration. What did you try to stop and to stay stopped? I know people that had everything in the world to live for. If they just don't drink, everything, beautiful girl, beautiful house, beautiful family, jobs, businesses, but yet they didn't have the power or the willpower to stay stopped on their own. And it's the reason why I know for me personally, I believe now from coming into this program and doing the work is that you can't stay sober and miserable. That eventually the pain of being sober becomes greater for me than the pain of drinking. At least I believe that delusion. Because like Adam says, we do the most insane thing sober when we pick up that drink. And here's the answer right here. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. Okay, so, but once we find that power, there is no dilemma. Let that one sink in. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. And that's in squiggly writing. Obviously, the shortest word in the big book, for those history, big book thumpers. But where and how are we going to find this power? Question mark. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you. So notice how it uses that word, enable you, to solve your problem. That means we've written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, we're going to be talking about God. Here, difficult arises with the agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss the alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of the spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject with our man, which we thought as neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And that's a question mark when you're working with someone. What is your thought process on, your higher power or any type of God in your life? And I think about Bill Wilson in the beginning when he was out there trying to drag people in, talking about the spiritual experience first, which is why we identify with the alcoholic, telling them about our drinking stories, get them talking about their drinking stories before we start talking of any type of higher power. But I know for me that when I came in, I surrendered to my higher power about the drinking and the drugs, but I wanted to handle everything else. And it says here, difficulty arises. And that's because in the material world, everything you could see, it makes sense. You're broke, you don't have a job, look in the paper, get a resume together, go interview, get a job, get paid, save money. You could see it. But when we're talking about these spiritual matter stuff, none of this stuff looks like it makes sense. So that's why the difficulty arises, how is God going to save me from doing this? Or how are these 12 steps? How is me writing an inventory? How is me doing these things going to help me? And that's because you can't really explain it. You just really have to do it. Go ahead, Adam.
So those are the last two warnings. They're on the bottom of page 44, where it says, if a code of morals were sufficient, many of us were recovered long ago. It says, as it says, those codes cannot save us. That's a warning. The second warning is our human resources marshaled by the world were not sufficient. They failed utterly. If you're new, I have to my experience with this now is to try to look at what is the main purpose of this chapter? And my experience is to get me to relinquish control, to be open-minded to some spiritual ideas. That's the fundamental theme I see in We Agnostics. It's going to go through some very specific considerations that are going to challenge what it means to have resources and to rely on self. And so that first piece where it says it had to be a power greater than ourselves. My experience, if you're new, if you are an agnostic or an atheist, I'm looking for a power other than myself. I'm starting to relinquish control. What agnosticism is for some of us is believing in a God and then living like there isn't one. It's acknowledging spiritual principles and then ignoring them. I'm starting to look at what it is and what it's asking me to do and consider here. That other piece about what this book is about, right? And this is a cliche kind of thing. When they asked Michelangelo, how did you make the statue of David? Michelangelo said, I never made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David, and there he was. Now, the fundamental idea with that, with the 12 steps, is to show me how to face and be rid of the things in myself, right? Some of these things are marshaled by the will that are actually blocking me from God, blocking me from spiritual ideas, blocking me from an open-mindedness to take actions that I do not believe in. If you're new, sometimes I look at this thing as grace, like an umbrella in a rainstorm. And what's blocking me from standing under that umbrella? Because I see other people under that umbrella that seem to be safe and protected. It's very simple. There is something in me that's blocking me because that thing we call grace, there's certain conditions that block me from it. So as it goes on, it says, but his face falls when we talk about spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man had neatly evaded or ignored. Ralph, we covered that entire paragraph, right?
Yeah. Yep, we know.
Okay, so we know how he feels, talking about the atheist or agnostic, the guy that's still living on self-will, that wants to ignore spiritual principles. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice, right? Have we? Everyone has doubt. All of us do. And in the moment of doubt, if you're new, it's really a lot better to be in doubt when you're sitting in an AA meeting, to be in doubt when you're connected to your sponsor, to be in doubt when you've written inventory and done the 11th step review and the 10th, the upon awakening prayers, okay? So it says, some of us have been violently anti-religious. The question again, if you're new, have you been violently anti-religious? And really ask the question, was it Bill? Was it Bill? When you look at the first half of Bill's story and look at Bill's fight against God, where he starts to argue of the hypocrisy of religion, right? To others, the word God brought a particular idea of him which someone had impressed upon them during childhood, right? Which makes people violently against religion. There's a little humor. I'm not going to say. I think it's, what does spinach, sex, and religion have in common? If they were forced on you as a child, you will not like them as an adult. I don't mean to be rude. I know that's a little out there, but somehow for me, I had been brought up in the Catholic Church where I had believed in a punishing God my whole life. I'd come into this thing with that attitude. I don't want to pray. I don't want God to find out where I was. And I had these ideas, and what this chapter is going to do is it's going to challenge those ideas. Very much like Sermon on the Mount. If you get the opportunity to read Sermon on the Mount, which was one of the books by Emmett Fox that was on Dr. Bob's mantle, it really opened me up to some spiritual ideas, not religious ideas. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate, like mythology. With that rejection, we imagine we had abandoned the God idea entirely. Had I abandoned the God idea entirely? We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power, capital P, right, beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity. This is all the hypocrisy that Bill talks about here, with deep skepticism. Do I have deep skepticism? I would ask the new person, you're working with this. We looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly, right? I mean, you see it in the Catholic Church now, and I'm not going to go there, but you guys know what I'm talking about. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyway? And start to look for the pronouns here for God, because he's going to use a lot of them in this chapter, just like he did in Bill's story. Yet in other moments, we sound ourselves thinking in an enchanted starlit night. When you look at the Milky Way and you see the billions of stars above you, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. For some of us, this thing we have called the gift of faith, if you're new, is very much a feeling. It's a feeling that we develop over a period of time by taking actions that we don't necessarily believe in. And that feeling is so powerful. If you question that, think about what it really means to be an alcoholic. Didn't all of us become hooked on a feeling? We love the feeling, the effect produced by alcohol, which is almost in and of itself a sentiment. It was so powerful for me that it turned the course of my entire life when I first ingested alcohol. And what we're saying here is if you take booze away from someone like me and you don't give me something better, I'll never stay here. We agnostics is implying that through this process, we will develop not only a belief in something, but a trust and then eventually a reliance upon it. And that seems to be the most powerful thing, to enable a person to find a power that will solve their problem. Ralph?
Did you finish that paragraph or no?
Yeah, I did. There was a starlit, the feeling of awe and wonder when you're sitting under the Milky Way looking at the universe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, we have agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We have found that as soon as we are able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend the power which is God. And it says set aside, and we always do the set aside prayer at our big book meeting, and whenever I work with somebody, and you could be working with someone that's been in AA for years or a brand new idea, and we're just asking you to set aside what you know for an open mind and a new experience. And it says, and what we're doing, we're just starting to build the structure now upon a willingness. That's on the bottom of the structure that we're going to be talking about. That's the key to everything. And the one thing that, I could read this book 100 times with people, is the one thing that I can't give them is that gift of desperation or the willingness to do the work. My sponsor told me that I alone must do this, but we never do it alone. It's going to be up to me to have the willingness. And the willingness comes from having a step one experience that I am going to drink again, that my situation is much worse than I really believe it is. And it talks about belief in that power. And for me, it came from people saying, believe that we believe that it's going to work, and me seeing and hearing other people who said they were just like me, who identified they were just like me, and I saw that it worked in them. I saw how they were like me, and now they were acting a different way. So I saw that, and I had some hope, and that hope is now turned into faith. And for me to step two, the simplest way, because I had some spiritual beliefs where they had to be changed to more of a personal relationship with my higher power, to be that I came to believe that a power greater than myself could help me see the truth about my drinking and drugging. Because on the truth, my sponsor said, you're not going to get drunk, but you'll get drunk on a lie. And the lie will go like something like this. You haven't had a drink in almost 20 years. You're over here on vacation. You're around nobody. Maybe you could have a drink. I believe a lie, take action on a lie, and open up the thing. But on the truth, there's no choice. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another conception of God. There's 65 people on here. There could be 65 different conceptions of God. AA isn't interested in trying to prove the existence of God, but the absolute need for a God in your life. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach, to effect contact with him. Later on, and more about alcohol, chapter 5, it says, if we stayed close to him and performed his work well. See, that guy, Rev, who I was locked up with, knew the menu very well, but he didn't know what the problem was. to getting connected to God. So here it's telling us that once we get connected to God, the problem is going to be solved. It says, much to our relief, we discover we do not need to consider another conception. My conception at first was, God, please help me. If you're up there, help me not drink and drug today. It was a simple connection, a simple dialogue that started that now has grown into other things. They always tell you that the road is very wide when we come in, and then it kind of narrows by a certain way we start living. Go ahead, Adam.
These are the two promises. The first one here is where it says, we found as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice. So if I can lay aside prejudice, right, and even express a willingness in a power, to believe in a power, we commence to get results. That actually is a promise. And it's very interesting, because if you're new, there's a thing called relinquish. It means to let go of control. And the opposite of admission is actually denial. And what I didn't understand is there's two kinds of denial here. There's denial about the problem. And most of us don't have to think twice about whether or not we're alcoholic. We kind of know, right? What it really is here is denial about the solution. That's what stops me, right? This lack of willingness, that these time-tested steps, this roadmap to spiritual success, this way of life, this holistic approach of mind, body, and spirit to a spiritual life isn't going to work for me. And you know why I think that? Because it wasn't my idea. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing resistance. But if I can follow these things and become willing to lay aside the prejudice, I'm going to get results. It's telling you, it's a promise. And then there's a direction here where it says, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. If you really look back at that, that's the same revolutionary idea that when Evie sat in front of Bill and Bill had that aha moment where he said, why don't you just develop your own conception? It was such a powerful thing, but it is the beginning. And my conception, like a lot of us, is God will steer, but God won't row. And if you really look at the third step, it's, we make a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God, not as we define God, but as we understand a relationship. This is going to start to help us to understand a relationship to a power. Very, very simple, but very different than a definition. We keep looking at a definition like an anthropomorphic God instead of a power, instead of maybe for a lot of us, a way of life, a principle that develops into something as we go along. So then there's that next piece where it says, as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, this is a promise, a spirit of the universe. Look at the pronouns. All of these are amazing pronouns. Every one of these pronouns that's capitalized here has a different meaning. It has a different meaning for an idea or a relationship to this power, okay? Underlying the totality of things. And it says, if we can do this, if we can admit it, we begin to be possessed with a new sense of power and direction. Power and direction, those two words are what you're going to look at many times in the book. Direction, wisdom, power. These are the three things that we look at in the 11th step. If you look at intuition, inspiration, these ideas, they are the result of these two words. We find that God does not make too hard of terms with those who seek him. Okay, we might want to talk about what those terms are. The first is to relinquish self-control, to be willing to take actions I don't believe in. Okay, to us, the realm of the spirit, another pronoun for God, the realm of the spirit, right? Broad and roomy, all inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek him. We believe it is open to all men. That's a powerful promise if you're new. Just chit chat with a new person about some of these ideas when you're going through this. All we're trying to do is get them a little bit motivated to go through the rest of the steps. All of this is about motivation. You're going to see it in these warnings. These warnings that we talked about on the last 2 pages are going to help that guy to be moving forward because he knows he's faced with alcoholic destruction. Al?
You want to, Jess, you want to do a seventh tradition?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to pause now for the virtual 7th tradition basket passing. We've got Rodney posted how you can do that in the chat. You don't need a PayPal account to contribute. You just click on the link. It'll take you right there. We also have e-transfers just using Rodney's Rodney at ficomputers.com. So all of the 7th tradition, it goes to various levels of service, and it'd be awesome. And I think that's all I got to say. Thanks.
All right. All right. Top of 47. When therefore we speak to you, my book is so highlighted. We speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God, ? Do you have a conception of God? What is it? This applies too to other spiritual expressions, which you'll find in this book. Do not let any prejudice or old ideas you have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to infect our first conscious relationship with God as we understood him. After we found ourselves accepting many things to which seem entirely out of reach, that was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. And I know for me, when I first started with this, I had the idea of Sister Margaret and Sister DeCoco in church and God being a punishing God. And slowly, from hearing other people's experience and developing my own relationship with my higher power, it changed dramatically. And it just changed to trying to be more of a spiritual person, just helping people and getting out of self. And when I got out of self and started doing things that seemingly like they wouldn't help, like cleaning ashtrays, like giving someone a ride, like showing somebody how to do something, like making coffee, like cleaning up, like volunteering, I started getting out of myself and I started to change. And the other people started to notice my change before I did. And it says accepting many things would seem entirely out of reach. And for me at the beginning, it was writing a 4-step. It was making amends. I owed a lot of money. It was being willing to make amends, and these things all started from right here, from me believing that if it worked for you people, there's just a chance it might work for me. And there is some attraction in that in the program we see, but none of that willingness that we're talking about will come if the new person thinks they have a choice over control and power. All right. And this is the consideration. If I lose power over choice, control, or power, if I lose one, I lose all three. If I lose one of those things, I lose all three. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe? He leaves you that little room that there is a power greater than myself. That's the consideration for step 2. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe there is a power greater than myself? And up until this point, when I'm reading with somebody, if they still don't believe, they still think that they have another choice. Maybe it's just, maybe they're there for the wrong reason. Maybe they're there just to get the wife off the back, to get in the big bed. Maybe they're there for an EAP program or whatever. But if they aren't willing, if they still think that they're the power, maybe they missed something in step 1 and they still think they have power over choice, that they could stay stopped and be happy. Go ahead, Adam. This is a good part. I want you to cover it.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you said. There's a saying, just to lead up to what you're saying, God cannot use a man till he comes to the end of himself. It's a great statement, right? And so this is the thing. What you were just talking about, I have written at the top of my book, I had to get results from booze before I could have faith in it. I had to. And my relationship with this power starts with this idea that I won't really trust and believe this, but what I'm asked to do now is just to be open-minded. Like we're at the point where, Ralph, have a drink, take a drink, see what happens. Where it's a challenge. So what I'm asked to do is to suspend my disbelief in this paragraph. If you really look at it, top of page 47, that's where we are. The first direction. Do not let any prejudice you have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Look how logical, sensible, simple, straightforward the book is. We're not trying to get you to believe anything. We're asking you to ask yourself what these ideas mean to you. It's so beautiful. And then this is the promise. At the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth. Listen, it's a promise. To effect our first conscious relationship with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed out of reach. And then the direction, that was growth. But if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. Okay? And then continuing down, right after where Ralph read, there's another big promise here. As soon as a man can say, right, that he does believe or is even him. He is on his way. This has been repeatedly proven. It's a promise among us that upon this simple cornerstone, this is like I think the first time where he starts using, Freemason terms, cornerstone, keystone, right? A wonderful, simple stone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So that's the question. That's where we just, I find God by default sometimes because I realize I can't do this on my own. This is going to be a theme going through We Agnostics. In and of myself, can I solve this problem? That's where I'm forced to come to God because psychiatry, therapy, even religion failed me. I can use religion in addition to AA, but never as a substitution for it. Ralph?
I think back to even in the doctor's opinion, it talks about other methods which failed completely. And I asked my new guy, what other methods have you tried? I share that I tried church. I tried going to my uncle paid for me to go to a shrink. I tried willpower. All these things failed me completely. Then I think on the top of page 28, it says, we sought with the desperation of a drowning man. And I picture myself now drowning in a sea of alcoholism, drinking, sober and drunk, that I was drowning. And it says what first seemed to be a flimsy reed turns into be the powerful hand of God. What first seemed to be the flimsy reed. And I think back to the story that Joe and Charlie used to talk about, hope turning into faith. You move to a new city, your car breaks, you're at this little diner and you're talking to a guy and you say, oh man, my car broke. I just moved here. I don't know anyone, and the chef comes out, this little cook, and he says, yeah. He goes, if you bring your car over to Jack's garage, he'll fix the car. He'll charge you a fair price and he does a good job. And you're like, well, I don't really know. You heard a lot of things about car guys, about mechanics, but you take on your hope that this guy's going to do it. So you get your car towed over there and he fixes it and you go there and he charges you a fair price and your car works. Perfect. Now, the next time your car breaks, you have faith that if you bring the car back to Jack, he's going to charge you a fair price and he's going to fix the car. And that's what happens here, where we start out as hope. And my hope is that if this doesn't work, I'm screwed. It better work. So it not only drives from the desperation of seeing more about alcoholism, seeing myself in the man of 30, seeing myself not in the man of 30, in the jaywalker. That was me, out of jail, drink, all these hopelessness. That's what drives step 2, that there is no other choice, to be doomed in alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis. Do the steps or die. That's what it comes out to for a guy like me. It says, this was great news for us who had assumed we could not make spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith, which seemed to be too difficult to believe. When people presented us with the spiritual approach, we all say, I wish I had what that man has, or I'm sure it would work if I could believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true because many articles of faith which are too plain to him. The articles of faith could be like someone who's quoting a Bible or a Quran or any of those other types of articles of faith, or it could be their spiritual beliefs that are keeping them sober at that point. But that's the greatest thing about us. It says it's our own conception of God. It was conforming to learn that we could commence on a much simpler level. And I'm telling you, my simple belief was, God, please help me get through the day without picking up a drink or a drug. It was that simple. And I didn't know if anyone was listening. I didn't know what was going on, but that's where I started. And it worked. Besides seemingly inability to accept much on faith, we found ourselves handicapped by abstinence, sensitiveness, and unreasonable old ideas. And again, the old idea was, go to confession once a month, do all these ritual things, and I wasn't connected at all. And I, like Adam, thought that God was going to punish me. I thought I had about 1,000 years in purgatory or the other spot. Many of us had been so touchy in even casual reference to spiritual things that made us bristle with antithesis. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. What sort of thinking? Old ideas. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. There's the set-aside prayer. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became open-minded to spiritual matters. Thank God for alcohol, because that's what that did. As we tried to beyond other questions, in this respect, alcohol was the great persuader. It finally beat us into the state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be this prejudiced for as long as some of us were. Wow. Adam?
Ralph, I'm still back at the diner with my broken down car. I'm telling you, after you did that talk about taking that car to the mechanic, when you were done doing that, I was about to say, where do I sign up?
Yep.
Because if a new guy is that broken and he's sitting in that diner with that broken down car, he has no choice. He's 1,000 miles away from his family, and he's all by himself, because that's what it feels like to be new. It feels like you're disenfranchised, that you're broken, you're out of ideas, and you're still going to fight to take that car over there. It's beautiful, Ralph. This is the next big warning here, where it says faced with alcoholic destruction, right? Or to live faced with alcohol, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. So that's a powerful warning right there. I'm starting to look at what stubbornness means. This stubbornness that blocks me from being open-minded. Like, I'm going to sit in that diner. I'm not going to take that car over there. I'm not going to give it to the care and protection of that mechanic. Like in that third step, I turn my will and life over to the care of God. I'm not giving the mechanic my car. I'm turning it over to him for care and protection to fix it. Very interesting, but very different. So that warning here is the beginning of a big kind of transition here. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. Like, I would be open-minded on taking that car over there, right? But I'm not going to be when it comes to spiritual ideas, unless I'm faced with alcoholic destruction. If you're new, how powerful is that statement? Are you faced with alcoholic destruction? Do you see the certainty and the pain and suffering if you don't take these actions? It was like, that is, and it says there above that, it says alcohol was the great persuader, right? It finally beat us. Have I been beaten into a state of reasonableness? And when you're working with a new person, you ask them these questions. Sometimes it's a tedious process, right? I mean, it's difficult because we defend our right to drink. And the second half of step one, we defend our right to play God. The first half, to defend my right to drink. The second, to defend my right to play God. We hope no one will be as prejudiced as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask himself why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. I know we're running out of time. The practical individual today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption of a starting point. Should I go on, Ralph?
I guess that's a good place to stop. And,
yeah, because it's very powerful, the next paragraph. Very powerful.
What we see, feel, direct, and use. And I have written next to that the power drill, which nobody used. They use, a power. You plug it into a wall, you turn it on, and you use it. It works fine. You unplug it, you lose the power. I don't need to know how that works. I need to know that if it's plugged in, it's going to work. When Sandy used to always talking about you could have a beautiful refrigerator with all this beautiful food and everything inside it. When you unplug it, it slowly starts to go bad. And that's what happens to someone like myself who gets unplugged. If I ever become unplugged, I know that that's going to happen. I'm going to lose the power. And I am not the power, but the power flows through us. I got some time for some questions.
Yeah, I would ask one last question to the people that are on this. This is the question I have in my book. How many things do I believe in that I do not understand? Because that's going to be the concept that's coming next week. I don't understand the way the picture cells work in this TV. Only 1 in like 1,000 people with electronic engineering, which is the most difficult of all engineering. There's more technology. There's 3 times as much technology in this cell phone than there is in Apollo 13 in that first spacecraft. But how many things do we trust that we do not believe? That is the first concept here. Yet why is it when we talk about spiritual matters, our mind snaps shut? There's the concept. That's all it is. Ralph, do you want to open it up to questions?
Yeah, Rodney, we got time? Okay. I see Bob from Detroit. Hey, what's up, Bob?
Hey, I'm Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your pace, and I always appreciate the recap because it always goes back to step one. But on this one, I work with a number of guys, and I appreciate that you didn't get bogged down in organized religion and bashing different faith persuasions. But when you're working with a guy who gets bogged down in his lack of faith or being caught up in the religion of his upbringing, how do you get him past that? Do you work on conceptions of God, or do you work on first step experience? How do you get him past that?
My question would be, it's got to be a first step experience that drives the need for some sort of power. It's always a step one experience, because if I don't understand step one, there's no need for me to believe in anything restoring me to sanity, because I don't think I'm crazy. I don't think I'm crazy in power to drink. Yeah, sure, sometimes I might drink too much, but I think I can still control it. If I'm not totally convinced that I'm powerless, that I will drink again, I found it very difficult to move forward in the work. Adam?
Yeah, that's the old saying in AA. If God scares you out of AA and you're a real alcoholic, don't worry about it. Booze will scare you back in. And another way to look at that is that, when someone's on their deathbed or they're confronted with their mortality, there's only two things they cry for: mommy and God. It's like, I mean, if you've ever been there, it's so it is this resistance that pushes against that. Sometimes it's more difficult to work with someone that's had a very difficult time with organized religion. But what I would do sometimes is look at comparative theology and reason with them that most world religions have 3 or 4 things in common. They all believe in the common good of mankind. They believe in that. Whether they do it or not is different. Most of them incorporate some kind of prayer and meditation. Most of them believe in some kind of life after death, with the exception of Buddhism. But in general, there's these certain spokes on this wheel that all believe in love and kindness. All of them involve charity, right? So you look at the good in it, and it's going to talk about this, that typically we can't see the forest because we see the ugliness of some of the trees. So I would try to separate these things. A lot of times I have a stained glass window in one of these places we go, and it says God is love. So I will play with some of these concepts. The love that a father has for a child. You know what I mean? The love that we have for another drunk. Don't you want to see somebody succeed here? Use that love to work with new people, to be helpful, to be kind, to be supportive. Let God be those actions for now. And maybe it'll develop into something else later. I tell a man I work with, if he had a daughter, what kind of man would he want his daughter to marry? And immediately he'll say loving, compassionate, loyal, considerate, supportive, generous, responsible. The fundamental idea of these concepts is built into everybody. If I can extract that through logic, later that reason becomes a reason to move forward. Right? So I'm trying to work with them here.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, we got a couple more hands up, but there is a question that came out in the chat a long time ago asking Adam, how did you define the word concede?
To surrender with a fight. The word concede means I stop defending my right to play God, my right to drink, there's a lot of things. My ideas, attitudes, and beliefs, those 3 constructs are what block me from a spiritual experience. An attitude that I can do whatever I want and not pay the consequences, my beliefs, my delusion, my selfish, my fear. Each one of those ideas is blocking me from a spiritual experience. Again, going back to that Michelangelo concept, if I can face and be rid of these things, if I challenge these ideas, just like this last challenge, how many things do I believe in that I don't understand? How often is my perception wrong, right? Once I'm able to admit, acknowledge, and accept these facts, suddenly I become open-minded. Suddenly I can look at that big arm on the Milky Way and realize there's more stars than there are grains of sand on all the beaches. How insignificant am I? Yet I'm powerful enough to understand it, at least at a fundamental level. Why wouldn't I be open to some spiritual principles. If all the people I've seen in AA that take birthday cakes, that have great lives, that are chasing their dreams, tell me they found a power, they developed a relationship to that power, and now their life is amazing, right? I mean, you can't argue with the results of AA. We can't see the win, but we see the results. And if you're new, I can see the results. I know a lot of people on this platform that have beautiful lives. How'd they get there? Ask them sometime.
Yeah. It's about changing the whole perception too. And it changes from going through this work. I was working with a guy before the meeting tonight, and we were talking about step 2, and we were talking about changing our perception, and the perception he had when he was a kid growing up, that his father beat him, that never took him anywhere and did all these things. That was the story that he told himself for many, many years. His sister recently digitized all family photos from as a kid, and he was watching it with